Once Spain held the world in the palm of its hand. This is not an exaggeration, it truly did. Today, when we think of the greatest empire in history, most people immediately think of Britain. But if you go back to the 16th century, the picture looks completely different. At that time, the empire whose flag flew across the globe, crossing oceans, linking continents, was not Britain. It was Spain. For the first time in history, a single crown ruled a global empire stretching from Europe to Africa, from the Americas to Asia. The territories were so vast that people began to say, the sun never sets on the Spanish Empire. Centuries later, the British would adopt this phrase, but it was first said of Spain. And this is where the irony of the story begins. The richest empire the world had ever seen collapsed because of its own wealth. And this is not just an old historical tale, because this story describes a mistake that societies keep making even today. The mistake of confusing sudden inflows of money with real wealth. And it is always societies that pay the price for that illusion. Welcome to the Economic Historian. You are at the intersection of money, power, and history. And here, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. When Spain reached the New World, after 1492, everything appeared perfect. The process that began with the voyages of Christopher Columbus placed Spain on top of an unprecedented fortune in human history. Gold and silver flowed into the Spanish treasury in quantities no European kingdom could even imagine. In 1521, Hernán Cortés destroyed the Aztec Empire. With it, rich mining regions like Zacatecas in Mexico came under Spanish control. A decade later, Francisco Pizarro entered Peru. The Inca Empire collapsed, and Potosí was revealed. Potosí was not an ordinary mine. It was a colossal mountain of silver, so vast that people called it the mountain that eats men, because thousands of indigenous workers lost their lives laboring inside it, and the silver did not stop. For more than a century, Potosí and other mines operated without pause. Treasure fleets crossed the Atlantic regularly. Ships departing from Veracruz and Havana arrived in Seville. Between 1500 and 1650, it is estimated that around 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold entered Spain. To put that into perspective, this was more silver than all of Europe had mined during the previous 1,000 years combined. This money did not just transform Spain, it transformed the entire world. The ports of Seville and Cadiz became the heart of global trade. Silver flowed into the Mediterranean, north to the Low Countries, and even crossed the Pacific to Manila, where it was exchanged for Chinese silk and porcelain. This was the first truly global economy in history, and Spain stood at its center. From today's perspective, one detail is especially striking. When Jamestown was founded in 1607, while England's first permanent American colony was still struggling to survive in a swamp, Mexico City already had universities, printing presses, and grand cathedrals. Lima had become a developed city. St. Augustine in Florida, founded in 1565, was the first permanent European settlement within what is now the United States, a full 40 years before Jamestown. So Spain was not merely early, it was operating on an entirely different level. But this is exactly where the problems began. Spain confused treasure with wealth. The silver was real, the gold was real. But the choices made with that money slowly weakened the empire from within. Prices surged. Between 1500 and 1600, inflation rose so dramatically that prices roughly quadrupled within a single century. For ordinary people, life became harder. The country sat atop mountains of silver, yet its people struggled to afford bread and clothing. The mechanism behind this is actually very simple. Imagine a town where bread costs 1 coin. One day, 10 times more money suddenly floods into the town, but the number of bakers and loaves remains the same. What happens? Bakers raise prices. Because the problem is not bread, it is the value of money. That is exactly what happened to Spain. Today, we call this the price revolution, the first great wave of global inflation in history. But it did not affect everyone equally. Those who accessed silver first, nobles, major merchants, and bankers, benefited. Those living on fixed incomes lost. The more silver arrived, the poorer the people felt. And inflation was not the only problem. Spain stopped producing. Why build factories? Why develop industry? After all, the treasure fleet was coming. Spain turned to imports. It bought luxury goods from Italian merchants. It purchased ships from Dutch traders. It paid German craftsmen. All of it was paid for with American silver. Meanwhile, domestic industry failed to develop and even withered away. Then came the wars, and wars were extremely expensive. The Habsburg kings saw themselves not merely as rulers, but as defenders of the Catholic world. Wars against the Ottomans, the Dutch revolt, struggles against Protestant England, endless conflicts with France, all were financed with silver. The Spanish Armada of 1588 was the most symbolic example. A massive fleet was sent toward England with great hopes. It failed. And this was not just a military defeat, but a financial shock. And Spain was not only spending the money that arrived, it was borrowing against money that had not yet arrived. German bankers like the Fuggers and Genoese financiers extended enormous loans in exchange for future silver shipments. The entire system rested on one assumption: the silver will come. But what if it didn't? If a fleet sank in a storm? If a fleet was captured by pirates? If a fleet was delayed? Spain defaulted, and it happened repeatedly. 1557, 1575, 1596, 1607. The richest empire on earth repeatedly declared, "We cannot pay." It was at this point that pirates entered the scene. But they were not merely adventurers, they were economic weapons. England and the Netherlands understood something crucial. If you strike the treasure fleet, you destroy Spain's credit. Figures like Francis Drake and Piet Hein did not simply steal gold, they destabilized the system itself. The loss of a single fleet could throw the entire financial structure into crisis. Meanwhile, England and the Netherlands reinvested the silver they captured into navies, banks, and trading companies. Spain consumed, they produced. That was the difference. Spain measured wealth in treasure. Its rivals measured wealth in systems. One runs out, the other multiplies itself. By the 1600s, Spain was still large, but no longer strong. On maps, it remained a vast empire. But it was hollow inside. Inflation crushed the population. Debt handed the crown over to bankers. Piracy made the system dangerously fragile. And this story is not only about the past. Even today, when money floods an economy while real production stagnates, the outcome does not change. The lesson is clear. Treasure is not wealth. Money is not security. Real wealth comes from systems that produce value. Spain realized this too late. By the time its rivals understood it, they had already begun building the future. History does not repeat itself exactly, but its rhythm is familiar. The real question is this: will we recognize the warning in time? If this narrative has changed the way you see the world, even slightly, subscribe. Because here we don't just list events, we examine the reasons behind them. History is silent, but it is full of answers. What matters is knowing where to look. And on this channel, that is exactly what we do.